Everest was walking around the abandoned camp for what felt like an eternity. She was already starting to lose hope. She wondered if Jake or any of the other pups were looking for her right now. She had no idea where she was going anymore. If she hadn't decided to follow that man, she would probably be home by now. And her body felt like it was about to give way from the horrid weather. But she just decided to keep going because she hoped that Jake and the pups would eventually find her. Everest was still walking around the abandoned campgrounds until she eventually found something very strange. It looked like a shack in the middle of the woods. This place looked extremely run down and possibly even abandoned. This place gave Everest chills, but she decided to see if anyone was living here. She highly doubted anyone was living here at all due to the conditions of the shack. But of course, there was only one way to know for sure. She walked up to the door and knocked on it. However, as she knocked, the door slowly creaked open and a horrible smell hit Everest like a train. Everest covered her nose as she began to explore around the shack, trying to find anyone in sight. However, there was nobody around. Just as Everest was about to leave, she heard noises coming from the second floor, and she decided to investigate. As soon as Everest reached the top floor, she couldn't believe her eyes. Everest was in shock after seeing what was presented to her. There were dead bodies everywhere, including the body of Mark Hill, the boy that Jason had killed earlier. The room reeked of blood and death, but the worst thing that was there was a shrine in the middle of the room, and sitting on top of it was a rotting head. Everest immediately wanted to throw up after seeing this madness, but then she heard footsteps coming up the stairs. She knew she had to hide or else whoever was coming up would catch her. She decided to hide in the body pile. She took a deep breath as if she was about to plunge into cold water, and jumped into the pile, completely hiding herself. As soon as the man came into view, it was revealed to be Jason Voorhees, the same man that Everest had followed earlier. Jason walked over to his mother's head and kneeled down in front of it. He stared at the head in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. After that, Jason quickly left the room, closing and locking the door behind him. Just then, Everest came out of the body pile. She felt completely nauseous. She literally felt like she was about to throw up. Everest had never seen this much death before, and her little puppy stomach couldn't take it. She immediately ran to the door and tried to open it, only to find that the door was completely locked shut. Everest began to panic as she tried looking for another way out, but each time around, her attempts continued to fail over and over again. Just then, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Everest began looking around for anywhere else she can hide, until she noticed a room in the corner. It looked like a bathroom. The place was completely filthy and covered in blood stains, but she had no choice. She immediately hid in the shower, waiting for the man to leave. Just then, Jason bursted the door down and began looking for a possible intruder. Jason looked around the room, trying to find any sign of an intruder. Meanwhile, Everest was hiding inside the filthy shower, hoping that Jason wouldn't find her. She covered her mouth with both of her paws to mute her breathing, beads of sweat dripping down her head, and she prayed to herself that the man wouldn't come to search in here. Just then, Everest heard footsteps leaving the room. She breathed a sigh of relief. However, her moment of relief was short-lived after she felt someone grab her from behind and was carrying her up to the third floor. It was Jason. Jason then kicked open the third-story doorway and tossed her straight out of the third-story doorway. Jason just stood there and watched as Everest laid still and unconscious on the ground. He could then see that Everest was still moving. He then turned to a yellow barrel and pulled out a sharp axe. Everest opened her eyes and saw that she was still alive. She tried to get up, but she felt a pain in her leg. Just then Jason dropped down and Everest turned to look at him with fear in her eyes. Jason tried to hit Everest with the axe, but she dodged it right on time. Everest turned around to get a good look at her pursuer. She saw that this man was huge, bigger than her. His clothes were tattered and dirty, his skin pale and gray, and he was wearing a dirty and rusty hockey mask to cover his face. Everest tried fighting back, but this man was much larger and much stronger than her. She immediately ran off as Jason began to follow her. After a little bit, she eventually lost sight of him, but while she was walking, she accidentally tripped and ended up tumbling down a snowy hill. After Everest woke up, she saw that her pup tag was broken and she also had a sprained paw, but thankfully she wasn't terribly injured. But she would have a limp in her walk until her paw was better. She then noticed that the snow began to fall at a rapid pace, and it was also getting colder and colder. Now, Everest has been living in the mountains long enough to know that rapid snowfall and colder temperatures can only mean one thing. A snowstorm was coming. Everest knew she couldn't stay here. Who knows how long it would be before Jason would find her again. So she just decided to keep walking and see if she could find a shelter around. Meanwhile, Marshall and Ryder were still searching around for any sign of Everest or Mark, but they couldn't find either of them. That was until they found the crime scene that Everest had discovered earlier. They found blood sitting under a tree, and there was also a blue Range Rover that was damaged. The two began searching around for any evidence until they eventually found something. It was a picture that fell out of Mark's hiking bag. It looked like a picture of an old abandoned campground. Marshall was confused, and Ryder was especially confused. Ryder told Marshall that they were going to explore the campgrounds. Maybe Everest or Mark could be there. But then they both noticed that the snow was beginning to fall at a rapid pace. Ryder checked his pup pad and saw that there was a snowstorm coming in just a few hours, so they needed to act quickly. Within seconds, Marshall and Ryder were already off to the abandoned campgrounds. Meanwhile, back at the lookout, the three remaining pups, Zuma, Rocky, and Rubble, were watching TV until they heard noises coming from outside. Rubble and Zuma went outside to see what the noise was, until they noticed something. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, was doing something to Rocky's recycling truck. Rocky immediately ran up to confront the man, but the man ran away and jumped into his Jeep and immediately drove off. Rocky was confused, but then Rubble called him over. The two pups immediately noticed there was a name carved into Rocky's truck. The name was Jason.